There is a specific kind of quiet that belongs only to a house where a man has lived alone for 3 years. It isn't the empty silence of an abandoned building. It's the heavy, settled quiet of 4 decades of memories resting on old hardwood floors. My name is Arthur Vance. I am 72 years old, a retired mechanical engineer and a veteran. For 42 years, I lived in a 2-story red brick house in the Clintonville neighborhood of Columbus, Ohio. I built the back porch with my own hands in the summer of 1984. I knew every creak in the hallway, every turn of the copper pipes in the basement, and exactly how much load the oak floor joists could bear. In my line of work, you learn to respect load-bearing structures. If you overload a beam, it doesn't always snap immediately. First, it groans. Microscopic fractures form inside the grain, long before the entire ceiling comes crashing down. I should have paid closer attention to the fractures in my own family. Stop. Before I tell you how my own children traded my freedom for a down payment on their prestige, please leave a comment and let me know where you're watching from today. And if you're new here, welcome to the channel. It began on a damp Tuesday morning in mid-October. I had come down with a minor seasonal fever, nothing severe, just a 72-year-old body slowing down for a day or two, with a dry cough and a temperature of 101. In a normal family, a father makes a pot of tea, stays in bed, and receives a phone call checking if he needs groceries. Instead, my son, Julian, arrived at 7 in the morning without knocking. Julian is 42. He wears $600 Italian leather shoes and works as a senior commercial real estate agent in Dublin, Ohio. He carries himself with the polished, frantic urgency of a man who is always trying to convince the room he is wealthier than he actually is. Behind him walked my 39-year-old daughter Clara, a lifestyle blogger who spends her life curating an image of effortless perfection for strangers on the internet. They didn't bring soup. They brought a man named Doctor. Eris, a smooth-talking private practitioner in a tailored suit, who held a silver pen and a clipboard like he was inspecting inventory at a liquidator's warehouse. "Dad," Julian said, his voice dripping with that rehearsed, practiced concern that always made my stomach turn. "You didn't answer your phone last night. Clara and I were sick with worry. You left the porch light on all day yesterday. You're confused, Dad. You're not managing." "I left the porch light on because the bulb in the socket was sticking," I said, my voice raspy from the fever, sitting up on the living room sofa. "And I didn't answer the phone at 9 at night because I was sleeping, Julian." "See?" Clara interjected, turning to Dr. Eris with a delicate, dramatic sigh, placing her hand over her heart. "He's disoriented. He forgets times. Doctor, he's been living in this massive house all by himself since Mom passed. He's completely isolated. Yesterday, we found a pile of unread mail on the counter." "It was junk mail from a roofing company," I replied, keeping my temper flat. As an engineer, I never believed in shouting. Loud noises just waste energy. Structural integrity is proven through solid mechanics, not volume. "Julian, Clara, what is this man doing in my living room?" Dr. Mares, Eris didn't look me in the eye. He clicked his silver pen. "Mr. Vance, your children have expressed deep concern regarding your cognitive decline and safety. I'm here to perform a brief evaluation to ensure you are receiving adequate, structured care." It took less than 15 minutes. Dr. Eris asked me 3 basic orientation questions, but every time I answered, Julian interrupted to reframe my words. When I reached into my cardigan pocket to retrieve my reading glasses, Julian gently but firmly pinned my wrist to the armrest. "Don't fight it, Dad," Julian whispered, his face inches from mine. Underneath his expensive cologne, I caught the faint, sour smell of stale whiskey and panic. "You've worked hard your whole life. It's time to let us take the wheel." What I didn't know that morning, what I wouldn't fully confirm until 3 weeks later, was that Julian's high-stakes commercial investments in downtown Columbus had collapsed 2 months prior. He was facing a personal guarantee call from his lenders for nearly $400,000. Clara's husband was drowning in credit card debt to support their country club membership. They didn't see a father sitting on that sofa, resting off a mild cold. They saw $650,000 of unencumbered equity in a Clintonville home, and a liquid living trust worth $1.15 million that sat tantalizingly out of their reach as long as I was legally recognized as a competent adult. By 1 o'clock that afternoon, a transport van pulled up to my driveway. They didn't give me time to pack a suitcase. Clara hastily threw 3 pairs of trousers, 2 shirts, and my toilet kit into a duffel bag. As Julian guided me toward the front door, my foot caught on the threshold I had nailed into place 30 years ago. I reached out and grabbed the oak doorframe, holding on for just a second. "Leave the house keys on the counter, Dad," Julian said, reaching into my pocket and pulling out my keyring. He detached the heavy brass key to the front door and slid it into his coat pocket. "We're taking care of the property now. You don't need to worry about bills or maintenance anymore." I looked at him. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I just looked at my son's eyes and saw the cold, calculating arithmetic running behind them. "You're making a mistake, Julian," I said softly. "It's for your own good, Dad," Clara repeated from the driveway, already tapping on her phone, likely posting an updates to her followers about the heartbreaking duty of elder care. As they loaded me into the back of the van, my hand slipped inside the inner pocket of my old flannel jacket. My fingers closed around a heavy, circular piece of metal with raised edges, my Silver Star military medal from 1974. I had taken it out of my desk drawer the night before to clean the ribbon. I squeezed the cool metal until the edges bit into my palm. It was the only piece of my past I had left. An hour later, the van pulled through the wrought iron gates of Oak Ridge Senior Care Facilities, a sterile, private facility 40 minutes outside the city limits. The lobby smelled of bleach, industrial floor wax, and overcooked vegetables. I was taken to room 114, a small square space with white walls, a single window facing a high brick perimeter wall, and 2 narrow twin beds. Before the transport driver left, a stern administrator in a dark blue blazer walked in holding a clipboard. "Mr. Arthur Vance," she asked, her voice lacking any warmth. "Your son, Julian Vance, has executed an emergency temporary medical placement order under Dr. Aris's initial assessment. Until a probate evaluation is completed by the Franklin County Court, your personal accounts and real estate access are temporarily restricted to your designated representatives." "My designated representatives," I repeated, standing by the edge of the narrow bed. "Your son and daughter," she replied flatly. "They have placed you on a restricted visitation protocol for your own rest and stabilization. No outside calls without staff monitoring." She turned and left, the heavy mahogany door clicking firmly into the frame behind her. I walked over to the small laminate desk in the corner. I sat down, pulled out my old pocket watch, and placed it on the wood alongside my Silver Star medal. Now, they thought they had locked away a helpless, confused old man who would crumble inside the quiet of an institution. They thought that by taking my front door key, they had taken my power. But Julian and Clara had forgotten one fundamental truth about the man who raised them. I was an engineer. I didn't react to stress with panic. I studied the forces acting against me. I mapped out the structural flaws in my opponent's design, and I waited for the exact moment to pull the pin. The third floor of Oak Ridge Senior Care was designed to look like a luxury hotel lobby, but it smelled like rubbing alcohol and overcooked broccoli. The walls were painted a sterile beige, and every hallway ended in an iron door that locked with a magnetic click. I sat by the window in room 114, watching the autumn rain streak down the glass. In my right hand, I held my Silver Star medal, tracing its metallic star with my thumb. For 3 days I had been kept under observation, a polite medical term for being held against my will. My phone had been confiscated for my emotional stabilization, and every meal was delivered by an orderly who looked at me not as a human being, but as a flight risk. They thought they had broken my spirit. They thought a 72-year-old retired engineer would sit in an armchair, watch game shows, and slowly fade into the background, while my children dismantled 40 years of my hard work. They didn't know about Sarah Jenkins. At 7 o'clock on Friday morning, the door to my room opened. A young woman in dark blue scrubs stepped inside, carrying a medication tray. She was in her early 30s, with sharp, observant dark eyes, and her hair tied back in a practical bun. She didn't have the practiced indifference of the other staff members. She set the tray on the bedside table and looked at the Silver Star resting on my desk. "First Infantry Division?" she asked softly, her voice carrying a crisp, professional warmth. "Is the brew—" I looked up, slightly surprised. 1974, Iron Triangle. How did you know that? "My father was 1st Infantry," she said, setting down a cup of water. "Captain Thomas Jenkins. He passed away 6 years ago from service-related complications. He kept his medal on the mantel, right next to his brass pocket watch." A sudden, sharp clarity hit my chest. Tom Jenkins, Tommy the Hammer Jenkins, from the 2nd Battalion. Sarah stopped. Her eyes widened, and a faint, sad smile crossed her face. "You knew my dad?" "I dragged your father out of a burning armored personnel carrier near Phuc Vinh," I said, my voice dropping to a low, steady murmur. "He carried a picture of you in his helmet liner when you were just a baby, Sarah. He talked about you every single night in the staging area." Sarah stepped closer, her posture shifting completely. She looked at the chart hanging at the foot of my bed, then looked back at me. The professional veneer melted away, replaced by an expression of deep, intense indignation. "Mr. Vance," she whispered, leaning in so the hallway monitors couldn't hear. "What are you doing in this ward? This wing is for advanced cognitive decline patients. I read your file this morning, doctor. Eris filed an emergency assessment claiming you suffer from severe vascular dementia and wandering tendencies." "I had a mild fever from a seasonal cold," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "My son and daughter brought that doctor into my home on Tuesday morning. They took my house keys, locked my front door, and brought me here." Sarah reached into her pocket, pulled out a small black penlight, and checked my pupils. She took my wrist, counting my pulse with the steady rhythm of someone who took her oath seriously. "Your heart rate is 64. Your pupils are equal and responsive. You are as sharp as a razor," she said, her jaw tightening. "They're giving you heavy sedatives, Mr. Vance. High-dose Haldol. Doctor. Eris ordered it twice daily starting last night. If you take these pills for 2 weeks, you will look confused. You will look like you have dementia." "I haven't swallowed a single pill," I said quietly, opening my hand to reveal 3 white tablets wrapped in a paper napkin I had hidden under my mattress. "I'm an engineer, Sarah. I don't swallow unknown chemicals handed to me by strangers." Sarah let out a quiet, trembling breath. "They're trying to establish a paper trail for a court conservatorship hearing. I saw the legal filings on the administration desk this morning. Your son Julian is petitioning the Franklin County Probate Court next Friday for full emergency control over your assets. They're listing your Clintonville home as an unusable asset to pay for your long-term care." My blood didn't boil. It turned into pure, cold ice. In engineering, when a bridge fails, it's rarely due to a single sudden blow. It fails because of hidden stress points that corrode over time until the structure can no longer support its own weight. My children had been planning this structural collapse for months. "Sarah," I said, looking at my old friend's daughter, "I need a landline, and I need someone who understands legal paperwork." "Mr. Vance," Sarah said softly, her hand resting on my shoulder. "My dad always said, a real soldier never leaves anyone behind. You're not alone in this room. I will log every real vital sign, every dosage refusal, and every cognitive check in my personal notebook. They won't forge a fake medical chart on my watch." While Sarah was documenting my true medical baseline inside room 114, 7 miles away in Clintonville, the betrayal was taking physical form. At 10 o'clock that same morning, a large silver SUV pulled into the driveway of my red brick home. Julian stepped out, dressed in an immaculate charcoal wool coat, accompanied by a woman in a bright red blazer holding a digital camera. Clara arrived 5 minutes later, carrying a stack of yellow staging signs that read, "Elegance Real Estate Group." My neighbor across the street, Arthur's lifelong friend, Frank Duca, a 74-year-old retired postal worker, was raking leaves on his lawn. He stopped his rake and walked over to the property line. "Julian," Frank called out, his voice rough from decades of working outdoor roots. "Where's your dad? I haven't seen his Volvo move since Tuesday. He promised to help me fix my snowblower this weekend." Julian turned, putting on a heavy, practiced look of grief. He walked over to Frank with his hands in his pockets, shaking his head with exaggerated sadness. "Oh, Frank, it's been a nightmare," Julian said, his voice dropping into that somber, rehearsed register. "Dad had a severe episode on Tuesday morning. High fever, complete disorientation. He didn't even recognize Clara. The doctors at Oak Ridge say his cognitive decline has accelerated rapidly." Frank narrowed his eyes, peering past Julian toward the front porch. "Arthur, cognitive decline. I was playing chess with him on the back porch last Sunday, Julian. He beat me in 11 moves. He was sharp as a tack." "That's how dementia works. Frank." Clara chimed in from the porch, holding a tape measure against the doorframe. "It comes in sudden, terrible waves. We had to make the painful decision to put him in full-time residential care for his own safety. We're prepping the house for an estate auction now to cover his medical bills." "Auction," Frank repeated, his jaw tightening. "Arthur built this house. He paid off the mortgage 20 years ago. He told me last month he was leaving this place in a trust for his granddaughter." Julian stepped closer to Frank, his eyes narrowing, the polite mask slipping for just a fraction of a second. "Frank, with all due respect, this is a private family matter. Dad's medical expenses at Oak Ridge are $12,000 a month. Unless you're planning to write a check for his care, I suggest you let us handle our father's estate." Frank stared at my son for a long, silent moment. He didn't argue. He just looked at Julian's $600 shoes, then at the real estate agent taking photos of my workshop in the backyard. "You're moving fast, Julian," Frank said softly. "Too fast for a grieving son. We're doing what has to be done. Julian snapped, turning his back and walking inside my house. Inside the kitchen, Julian unlocked my private desk drawer with a crowbar he had retrieved from the garage. He dumped the contents onto the oak table: bank statements, tax records, and the original blue folder containing the 2018 Vance Family Living Trust. Clara sat across from him, sipping a latte she had brought with her.
"What does the trust document say?"
Julian flipped through the pages, his fingers leaving smudge marks on the paper. "It designates Dad as the sole trustee while living, but names us as equal 50-50 beneficiaries upon his death or legal incapacity. Once Dr. Aris's final competency report is filed with the court next week, we assume full authority as co-trustees."
"And the Clintonville house?" Clara asked, leaning forward.
"Yeah, I already have an off-market buyer lined up," Julian said, a cold, triumphant smile spreading across his face. $650,000, cash, no inspection, closing in 14 days. That clears my debt with the Chicago lenders and leaves us with enough to pay Oak Ridge's basic room rate for the next 3 years.
"What if Dad demands to see his attorney?" Clara whispered, glancing toward the window.
"Marcus Sterling is 71 and semi-retired in Florida," Julian scoffed, tossing the trust folder back onto the table. "Dad hasn't spoken to him in 8 months. By the time anyone realizes what's happened, the deed will be recorded, the funds will be transferred, and Dad will be comfortably settled in room 114 for the rest of his life." Back at Oak Ridge, as the afternoon light began to fade, Sarah Jenkins walked into my room during shift change. She casually leaned against the doorframe, checking her clipboard. When the hallway was clear, she slid a small silver flip phone from her pocket and placed it quietly on my bed.
"It's a prepaid burner,"
she whispered. "The number for Sterling and Vance Legal Services in downtown Columbus is saved in the contacts. I called Marcus Sterling's office 10 minutes ago. He isn't in Florida, Mr. Vance. He's sitting in his office on High Street, waiting for your call." I looked at the small phone, then at Sarah. "Thank you, Sarah," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I hadn't felt in days. "Don't thank me yet, Mr. Vance," she said, giving my hand a firm squeeze. "My father told me that when you were under fire, you never backed down. Now it's time to build your counter-engine." She turned and left, closing the door softly. I picked up the silver phone, dialed the number, and held it to my ear. On the third ring, a familiar, deep voice answered. "Hello, Marcus," I said, staring out at the rain-soaked brick wall outside my window. "It's Arthur Vance. My children have locked me in Oak Ridge, and they're breaking open my desk. It's time to activate Section 14 of the Living Trust." The sound of Marcus Sterling's voice through the speaker of that cheap burner phone was like the steady thrum of a diesel engine idling in the cold, solid, familiar, and unyielding. "Arthur," Marcus said, his deep baritone cutting through the low static. "I've been trying to reach your personal line since Wednesday. Julian showed up at my High Street office 2 days ago with a young man in a suit, demanding I hand over the original physical copies of your 2018 Living Trust documents. He claimed you were incapacitated and that he was acting as interim power of attorney." I leaned back against the thin foam pillow of my hospital bed in room 114, staring up at the water-stained ceiling tile. "What did you tell him, Marcus?" "I told him that in 41 years of practicing law in Franklin County, I have never handed client files to a third party without a signed court order or a direct instruction from the client himself," Marcus replied dryly. "He threatened to report me to the Ohio Bar Association. I offered to hand him the complaint form myself. Where are you, Arthur?" "Oak Ridge Senior Care," I said quietly. "Ward 3. They've got me listed under cognitive evaluation. Doctor. Eris signed an emergency incompetency hold.
Marcus was quiet for 2 full seconds, a deliberate, professional pause.
Doctor, Eris, the doctor who lost his hospital privileges at Riverside 2 years ago for billing irregularities. Julian's been using him for commercial insurance physicals. A quiet papers rustling came over the line. They're moving fast because Julian is cornered, Arthur. I ran a judgment search on his LLC yesterday afternoon. He's got a junior lien holder in Chicago threatening foreclosure on his Dublin townhouse by the 1st of next month. He needs liquid cash, and he needs it before his creditors drag him into bankruptcy court.
I know, I said.
He took the front door key to Clintonville on Tuesday. He brought a staging agent to the house this morning. They're getting ready to list it, off-market.
Then we execute Section 14,
Marcus said, his voice hardening into steel. When we drafted the Vance Family Living Trust 6 years ago, after Eleanor passed, you insisted on adding the fraudulent intervention and bad faith disinheritance clause. You told me then that you hoped you'd never need it.
I built machines for 40 years, Marcus,
I replied, tracing the cool edge of my Silver Star medal in my pocket. You always build a manual override into a hydraulic system. If a line blows, you don't argue with the pressure. You shut the valve.
I'll be at Oak Ridge tomorrow morning at 9, Marcus said.
I'm bringing a mobile notary and a court reporter. Stay quiet, Arthur. Let them build their tower a little higher. The higher they build it, the harder the ground hits when it comes down.
At precisely 8:45 on Saturday morning, Sarah Jenkins walked into room 114, carrying a fresh tray of morning vitals.
She didn't say a word. She moved to the window, pulled the blinds back just enough to look out over the visitor parking lot, and turned to me with a sharp, decisive nod.
"A black Lincoln just pulled up," Sarah whispered. "An older gentleman in a dark trench coat with a leather briefcase. He's walking through the main lobby right now."
2 minutes later, the door to room 114 opened.
Marcus Sterling walked in. At 71, Marcus carried himself like a man who had spent his life standing in front of judges who didn't tolerate nonsense. Behind him came a young woman carrying a portable document scanner and an official notary seal.
Marcus didn't glance at the sterile surroundings.
He walked straight to the side of my bed, unbuttoned his coat, and reached out a large, weathered hand. "You look tired, Arthur. But your eyes are as clear as the day we passed the Ohio PE board exam."
"I haven't taken their pills."
"Marcus," I said, shaking his hand firmly.
"I know you haven't," Marcus said, turning towards Sarah.
"And Miss Jenkins here has already secured the paper trail." Sarah stepped forward, pulling a thick black leather notebook from her medical tote bag. She opened it to a series of hand-lettered charts, every entry stamped with time, date, and her professional nursing signature.
"These are Mr. Vance's actual vital signs for the past 72 hours,
Sarah said, her voice crisp and authoritative. Blood pressure consistently 118/76, heart rate steady at 62, cognitive orientation scores 30 out of 30 on every informal check. I've also logged every instance where I disposed of the unprescribed Haldol doses ordered by Dr. Eris without authorization from a board-certified neurologist." Marcus took the notebook, handed it to the notary to scan immediately, and looked at me. "This notebook alone destroys Dr. Eris's emergency assessment in front of any probate judge in the state of Ohio. It proves deliberate medical conspiracy to induce cognitive impairment." Marcus opened his leather briefcase and pulled out a 4-page legal document printed on heavy bond paper, the formal amendment to the Vance Family Living Trust.
Under Section 14,
Marcus explained, pointing his pen to the 3rd paragraph. The grantor reserves the absolute right to unilaterally modify beneficiary distributions upon evidence of coercion, bad faith, or unauthorized attempted liquidation of trust assets by designated heirs. We are executing 3 specific modifications today. He read them aloud in the quiet of that care home room. First, Julian Vance and Clara Vance Sterling are permanently removed as co-trustees and revoked as beneficiaries of the Vance Family Living Trust and all associated real estate. Under the explicit provisions of the No Contest Disinheritance Clause, their financial share of the estate is reduced to $0. Second, the red brick residential property on Clintonville Road, along with 100% of the liquid investment portfolio, totaling $1.8 million, is transferred upon my passing into the newly established Arthur and Eleanor Vance Veterans Memorial Foundation, dedicated to providing vocational scholarships for children of fallen service members. Third, a dedicated educational trust fund of $250,000 is immediately carved out from the liquid reserves to support the higher education of Sarah Jenkins' daughter, in recognition of Captain Thomas Jenkins' service and Sarah's unyielding ethical integrity. I took the fountain pen from Marcus's hand. My hand didn't shake. I signed my name, Arthur G. Vance, on the 3 designated signature lines. The notary stamped the red foil seal onto the paper with a heavy metallic crunch that echoed through the room. "It's done," Marcus said, sliding the executed original back into his briefcase and locking the brass clasps. Now, we let Julian take the final step. "What's his next move?" I asked. "Julian called my office again an hour ago," Marcus said, a cold, thin smile appearing at the corner of his mouth. "He believes the Franklin County Probate Court will automatically grant his temporary conservatorship petition this coming Tuesday. He has invited his off-market cash buyer to your house in Clintonville on Monday evening at 6 o'clock to execute a preliminary purchase agreement for $650,000. He's hosting a celebratory dinner at your dining room table for Clara, her husband, and the buyer." I stood up from the chair, walked over to the small laminate desk, and picked up my Silver Star medal. I looked at Marcus, then at Sarah, who was standing by the door with a look of quiet, resolute pride. "A celebratory dinner in my house," I said softly. "Don't. They think you're locked in this room, Arthur," Marcus said, buttoning his coat. "They think the house is theirs, the money is theirs, and the story is theirs. On Monday night at 6 o'clock, I will personally deliver the executed trust amendment and the revocation notice to your dining room table." "No, Marcus," I said, sliding the medal into my flannel jacket pocket and looking my attorney in the eye. "You won't deliver it alone. On Monday night at 6 o'clock, I'm going home for dinner. There is a distinct, unmistakable arrogance that belongs to people who believe they have won a game before the final board is set. By 6 o'clock on Monday evening, my home on Clintonville Road had been transformed into a staging ground for a victory party. High-end catering trays sat on the granite kitchen counters, and the faint, sweet smell of a $200 Napa Valley Cabernet filled the dining room, where my late wife, Eleanor, had set the table for 30 family Thanksgivings. Julian stood by the stone fireplace in his tailored charcoal suit, swirling a glass of wine with the easy, comfortable confidence of a man who had just erased his debts with the stroke of someone else's pen. Beside him stood Clara, wearing an elegant cream silk blouse, carefully adjusting a floral centerpiece for her social media feed. Across the mahogany dining table sat Arthur Pendleton, a slick, 45-year-old private investor from Upper Arlington, who had brought his personal attorney to execute the cash buyout agreement for $650,000. "The location is unbeatable. Julian," Pendleton said, setting down his leather portfolio with a heavy, satisfying thud. 650,000 cash, closing in 10 days. My crew will have the interior gutted by the end of the month.
Gutted? Clara chimed in, leaning against the chair where her mother used to sit.
Oh, absolutely. The floorboards are outdated, and the built-in cabinets are completely old-fashioned. My father maintained it like it was 1985. He simply lacked the vision to see what this property could be.
Julian checked his gold watch, smiling widely.
Well, he won't have to worry about floorboards anymore. The team at Oak Ridge assured me this morning that he's settled in nicely. He's quiet, cooperative, and taking his medication on schedule. Honestly, Clara, putting him in a full-time care facility was the most merciful thing we've ever done for him.
To mercy, then.
Pendleton laughed, raising his wine glass, and to a clean, quiet closing. They clinked their glasses. The sound echoed through the high ceilings of my living room. Outside in the driveway, a dark sedan pulled up to the curb. When I stepped out of the passenger side into the crisp, rain-washed October air. I wore my dark flannel jacket over a clean iron shirt, my Silver Star medal resting securely in my inner breast pocket. Alongside me walked Marcus Sterling, holding his thick leather briefcase. Behind us walked two uniformed deputies from the Franklin County Sheriff's Department, led by Detective Arthur Vance, a man who had spent 20 years handling elder fraud investigations for the county prosecutor's office. I didn't rush. I walked up the 3 brick steps I had laid 30 years ago, stood on the porch threshold, and listened to the cheerful, unbothered laughter drifting through the front window.
Ready, Arthur? Marcus asked quietly beside me.
I've been ready since Tuesday. Marcus, I said. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the spare brass key I had kept in my safe deposit box for 15 years, slid it into the deadbolt, and turned it. The lock clicked open with a sharp, heavy mechanical crack. I pushed the mahogany door open and stepped into the foyer. The laughter in the dining room didn't stop immediately. Julian was in the middle of telling a joke about commercial zoning when he turned toward the hallway, expecting to see a late catering staff member. Instead, he saw me. His wine glass froze halfway to his lips. The color drained from his face so fast it looked as if someone had physically struck him across the chest. Clara's fork dropped onto her china plate with a sharp chime that shattered the room's atmosphere. "Dad?" Clara stammered, her voice pitching up into a high, hysterical register. What? What are you doing here? You're supposed to be at Oak Ridge. How did you get out?" Julian took 2 frantic steps forward, his practiced, smooth demeanor instantly collapsing into raw panic. "Dad, who brought you here? Is there an emergency? Did you wander off again?" He turned toward the hallway, his hands waving in the air. "Where are the orderlies? I called Dr. Aris." "Dr. Aris is currently being interviewed by the State Medical Board in his office. Julian," Marcus Sterling interrupted, stepping past me into the dining room, his voice flat, heavy, and resonant as a courtroom gavel. "Along with the administration of Oak Ridge Senior Care," Julian stared at Marcus, his jaw working silently, his eyes darting frantically between me, my attorney, and the 2 uniformed deputies standing in the foyer. "Marcus, what is this? This is a private family dinner. We're executing legal documents for my father's estate care." "You're not executing anything, Julian," Marcus said smoothly. He walked to the head of the dining table, placed his leather briefcase on top of the crisp white tablecloth, and popped the brass latches open. "Mr. Pendleton, if you are the prospective buyer for this property, I strongly advise you to put your pen down and step back from the table." Pendleton looked at Julian, then at the uniformed deputies, and immediately pulled his hands back, sliding his portfolio into his coat.
What the hell is going on here, Vance? You told me you had full power of attorney.
He lied, I said, stepping fully into the warm light of the dining room. My voice was low, steady, and unhurried. I walked to the edge of the oak dining table, pulled out the chair at the head of the room, and sat down. I looked at my son. I looked at my daughter. I saw the panic, the disbelief, and the specific, ugly terror of two people who had just watched their entire elaborate structure collapse around their ears.
Dad, listen to me, Julian begged, stepping closer, his hands shaking as he reached out toward me. We did this for you. The house is too big. You were sick. We were trying to manage your medical expenses before you lost everything.
You were trying to manage your $400,000 debt to your Chicago creditors. Julian, I said, looking him dead in the eye. This was deranged. Julian froze as if he'd been doused with ice water. And you, Clara, I continued, turning my gaze to my daughter, whose eyes were already brimming with wild, frightened tears. You wanted $60,000 to clear your husband's credit card balances so you could maintain your country club membership in Dublin. You didn't put me in Oak Ridge to protect my health. You put me there because I was standing between you and $1.8 million.
That's not true,
Clara sobbed, clutching her designer purse to her chest.
We love you. We were doing what any responsible children would do.
A responsible child doesn't forge a medical assessment. Detective Ron Vance stepped forward, pulling a blue folder from his coat. And a responsible nurse doesn't keep a secret log of high-dose sedatives ordered to induce cognitive disorientation. Miss Sarah Jenkins provided us with 3 days of verified medical logs, along with audio recordings of your telephone conversations regarding the sale of this house. Clara let out a choked scream and sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. Now, Marcus Sterling said, pulling a 4-page document with a red foil seal from his briefcase and laying it flat in the center of the table. Let's discuss the Vance Family Living Trust. Julian stared at the red seal. That's the 2018 trust document. No, Julian, Marcus replied, a thin, ruthless smile crossing his face. This is the executed amendment to the Vance Family Living Trust, signed by your father on Saturday morning at Oak Ridge, fully notarized and filed with the Franklin County Probate Court 8 hours ago. Marcus cleared his throat and began reading aloud, his baritone filling every corner of the house. Under Section 14 of the grantor's provisions, due to documented acts of bad faith, legal coercion, and fraudulent attempt to liquidate trust assets, Julian Vance and Clara Vance Sterling are hereby stripped of all co-trustee authority and permanently disinherited from the Vance Family Living Trust. Their share of all real estate, cash, and investment portfolios is reduced to $0. Julian stumbled back against the fireplace mantel, his face completely pale, his chest heaving. "0, Dad. You can't do this. You're leaving us with nothing. You had everything." "Julian," I said, standing up slowly from my chair. "You had a father who loved you, who paid your college tuition, who gave you a home, and who trusted you. You decided that wasn't enough. You decided my life was an asset to be liquidated."
"Dad, please!"
Clara cried out, rushing toward me, reaching for my arm.
"We're your blood. You can't give our inheritance to strangers."
I stepped back, setting a clear physical boundary between us. I reached into my cardigan, pulled out my Silver Star medal, and laid it on top of the trust documents on the table. This house, along with my entire investment portfolio, has been transferred to the Arthur and Eleanor Vance Veterans Foundation, I said softly.
And an educational trust has been established for Nurse Sarah Jenkins' daughter, the child of a real soldier who understood what loyalty actually means.
Julian looked at the deputies, his voice breaking into a ragged, desperate whisper.
"Officer, this is a mistake. He's confused. He doesn't know what he's signing." Detective Vance stepped forward, placing a firm hand on Julian's shoulder. Mr. Vance, you and your sister need to step away from the table. You are formally trespassers on this property. Furthermore, you are both required to report to the Franklin County Municipal Courthouse tomorrow morning at 9 for formal arraignment on charges of elder financial exploitation and conspiracy to commit medical fraud.
The silence that followed was complete, heavy, and absolute.
Julian looked at me one last time. For the first time in his life, there was no charm, no smooth sales pitch, and no calculated arrogance left in his eyes. He looked like a man standing inside a building he had spent months sabotaging, only to realize he was the only one trapped inside when the roof gave way.
"Get out of my house, Julian," I said flatly, "and leave the keys on the counter." They left the brass front door key sitting on the granite kitchen counter, right next to an unopened bottle of $200 wine. Julian didn't say another word as Detective Vance escorted him down the brick front steps. Clara sobbed all the way to her car, her luxury designer purse swinging wildly from her shoulder, her manicured life unraveling under the porch light of the house she had tried to auction off. The prospective investor, Mr. Pendleton, had already vanished into the darkness 5 minutes earlier, making sure his name was nowhere near the police report. By 8 o'clock, the red brick house in Clintonville was quiet again, and Marcus Sterling stood by the dining room table, carefully sliding the executed living trust amendment and the police statements back into his leather briefcase. Detective Vance finished his final notes, shook my hand firmly, and walked out the door, promising that the formal criminal summonses would be served at Julian's and Clara's residences by 8 the next morning. Only Marcus and I remained in the dining room. "They'll try to fight the disinheritance clause." "Arthur," Marcus said, clicking the brass clasps of his briefcase shut, "Julian will hire a high-priced probate attorney in downtown Columbus. Clara will claim emotional distress and coercion." "Let them try," I said, walking over to the window and watching the rain drip off the porch eaves. Section 14 was drafted with triple redundant language, Marcus, and with Sarah Jenkins' sworn medical logs and Dr. Eris's surrender of his medical license under board review, no judge in Franklin County will touch their appeal. A machine built on a cracked foundation cannot hold pressure. "You were always a damn good engineer, Arthur," Marcus said, stepping beside me and laying a heavy hand on my shoulder. "What are you going to do now?" "I'm going to sit in my chair," I said softly, "and I'm going to enjoy the quiet." 6 months later, the spring sun had returned to Columbus, Ohio. The red tulips Eleanor had planted 15 years ago were blooming along the front walkway of the Clintonville house. The legal proceedings had moved with the steady, cold efficiency of the legal system. Dr. Eris surrendered his medical license to avoid state prison time and was ordered to pay restitution. Julian was forced to declare Chapter 7 bankruptcy after his Chicago creditors foreclosed on his Dublin townhouse. He spent 60 days under house arrest for his role in the medical forgery. Clara's husband filed for divorce 3 months after the scandal broke, unable to sustain the financial ruin and the public embarrassment. Neither of my children had called me since that Monday evening. They had chosen their path, and the boundary I set remained absolute. I forgave them in the quiet of my heart, but I never gave them back the key. On a bright Saturday morning in May, a white sedan pulled into my driveway.
Sarah Jenkins stepped out, wearing comfortable jeans and a sweater, holding the hand of her 8-year-old daughter, Emily. Emily carried a small wooden toy train under her arm. I walked out onto the back porch, the porch I had built with my own hands 38 years ago. I pulled out 2 chairs and sat down in the warm spring sunlight. "Mr. Vance," Sarah said with a bright, warm smile, setting a basket of blueberry muffins on the outdoor table. "Emily wanted to bring you a thank you note. She got her acceptance letter from the Columbus Academy summer program yesterday. She got in on her own merit." "Sarah," I said, reaching down and gently ruffling the young girl's hair. "The trust fund just pays the tuition. Her grandfather would have been proud of her." Sarah looked at me, her eyes glistening with quiet tears. "He would have been proud of both of us, Mr. Vance." Yeah. I reached into my cardigan pocket, pulled out my silver star medal, and set it on the table alongside my old pocket watch. Emily looked at the shiny star with wide, curious eyes. "Is that a hero medal, Mr. Vance?" the little girl asked softly. "Vance?" "No, sweetheart," I said, looking out over the green lawn, feeling the cool breeze against my face and the solid oak boards beneath my feet. "It's just a reminder that when the storms come and the people you trust try to tear down your walls, you stand firm, you keep your integrity, and you protect what truly matters." If you were in my shoes, would you have given your children one final chance, or would you have closed that door forever? Please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.